And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
A lot of IFR coming into the west coast here for late tonight and early tomorrow morning, and then extending back to the west, covering all the northern Bering Sea and southwestward into the far western Aleutians. Otherwise, VFR here for the interior all the way down to the North Gulf Coast, and some marginal VFR here for the southeast coast. And then for the afternoon, this area edges eastward here, especially up to the northwest there with IFR spreading in toward Dead Horse, back to the west here and southwest, covering the west coast, coming in now over the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta areas, and extending down to the eastern Aleutians, north shore of the Alaska Peninsula. Behind that, marginal VFR, then some more IFR, again out toward Shimei and Attu. Yukon River eastward here to the border and into the Yukon stays VFR, and some marginal VFR just east of Kodiak Island, across the Gulf here, right on up into Yakutat, and not too bad, mostly VFR for the southeast coast. Then for Saturday, IFR progressing all the way to the eastern border now, and another batch up there for the eastern North Slope and along the Arctic coast, but improving back here to the west here with some VFR at the lower Yukon River Valley, back up towards Shishmaref and the Bering Strait, and then more IFR here for the northern Bering Sea, Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, and right on down to the north shores of the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. With marginal VFR behind that, stays VFR here from Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, all the way up across the Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast, and the Panhandle, VFR. And for Monday afternoon, good VFR here for the southeast coast, now across the Gulf, and everywhere south and east of the Alaska Range, all the way into Bristol Bay. Even the western part of the state here sees some some VFR, and then lower conditions over the Tanana Valley with some areas of IFR there. A little more widespread IFR for the eastern Brooks Range out to the eastern Arctic coast. Huge area of IFR again over the eastern Bering Sea. St. Lawrence Island, again, right on down to the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, with marginal VFR for the central Aleutians. And for passes, for both Anaktuvuk and Adigan, conditions coming down throughout the day, becoming IFR at some point in the day Sunday tomorrow. For, again, both Adigan, Anaktuvuk first, and then Adigan becoming IFR shortly thereafter. Lake Clark and Merrill, though, VFR, another VFR day for rainy and windy. Isabel and Mentasta, VFR for both of those locations. And Tanita as well, Tanita, VFR, Portage, VFR, Chilkoot and White, should squeeze another VFR day out there. And for the freezing levels here, about 2,000 feet over the Gulf of Alaska, down toward Heidelberg. Otherwise, with the upper high pressure warm air aloft, we've got 8,000 feet covering the northern Bering Sea right up to north of St. Lawrence Island. And from there, looking at the icing, that moisture coming eastward here, looking at considerable moderate icing for the central Arctic coast, right on due south here into the Kuskokwim Valley, with increasing icing threats to the western Alaska Range. And then for the 33,000 foot wind flow chart, big area high pressure here north of the central Aleutians, strong jet coming around that feature, 90 knots here coming into the, the north slope there, 125 knots over the Chukchi Sea out of the southwest, and then northerlies 120 to 130 knots here for the east side of the state down to the Prince William Sound area, and then pretty light there for the Panhandle. 9,000 feet, light winds continue here for the southeast coast into the Gulf and even the eastern interior, but with high pressure out here over the central Aleutians. Good west-southwest flow coming over that high, 75 knots there for the northern Bering Sea. Takes a turn to the south here at about 45 to 55 knots across the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. Northeasterlies 40 knots clipping southern Kodiak Island. 3,000 feet, some stronger winds there. Maybe at 25, 30 knots for the southern Kodiak Island area, otherwise light here. It extends over the central and eastern interior. But 55 knots southwest winds to the western Arctic coast. Northwest 40 knots here blowing in toward the Yukon Delta coast, and then northerlies up to 50 knots there for the eastern Aleutians. And moving on to turbulence. With those winds, we've got a pretty good area of considerable moderate turbulence in the forecast for the Brooks Range here, right on out to the Arctic coast, western Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, and for the eastern Aleutians and most of the Alaska Peninsula.